Byzantine iconoclasm refers to two periods in the history of the Byzantine Empire when the use of religious images or icons was opposed by religious and imperial authorities within the Eastern Church and the temporal imperial hierarchy. The First Iconoclasm, as it is sometimes called, lasted between about 726 and 787. The Second Iconoclasm was between 814 and 842. According to the traditional view, Byzantine iconoclasm constituted a ban on religious images by Emperor Leo III and continued under his successors. It was accompanied by widespread destruction of images and persecution of supporters of the veneration of images. The Western Church remained firmly in support of the use of images throughout the period, and the whole episode widened a growing divergence between the Eastern and Western traditions in what was still a unified church, as well as facilitating the reduction or removal of Byzantine political control over parts of Italy. Iconoclasm, Greek for breaker of icons, is the deliberate destruction within a culture of the culture's own religious icons and other symbols or monuments, usually for religious or political motives. People who engage in or support iconoclasm are called iconoclasts, a term that has come to be applied figuratively to any person who breaks or disdains established dogmata or conventions. Conversely, people who revere or venerate religious images are derisively called iconolators. They are normally known as iconodules or iconophiles. These terms were, however, not a part of the Byzantine debate over images. They have been brought into common usage by modern historians, and their application to Byzantium increased considerably in the late 20th century. The Byzantine term for the debate over religious imagery, ikonomachy, means struggle over images, or image struggle. Iconoclasm has generally been motivated theologically by an Old Covenant interpretation of the Ten Commandments, which forbade the making and worshipping of graven images. The two periods of iconoclasm in the Byzantine Empire during the 8th and 9th centuries made use of this theological theme in discussions over the propriety of images of holy figures, including Christ, the Virgin and saints. It was a debate triggered by changes in Orthodox worship, which were themselves generated by the major social and political upheavals of the 7th century for the Byzantine Empire. Traditional explanations for Byzantine iconoclasm have sometimes focused on the importance of Islamic prohibitions against images influencing Byzantine thought. According to Arnold J. Toynbee, for example, it was the prestige of Islamic military successes in the 7th and 8th centuries that motivated Byzantine Christians to adopt the Islamic position of rejecting and destroying idolatrous images. The role of women and monks in supporting the veneration of images has also been asserted. Social and class-based arguments have been put forward, such as that iconoclasm created political and economic divisions in Byzantine society, that it was generally supported by the Eastern, poorer, non-Greek peoples of the empire who had to constantly deal with Arab raids. On the other hand, the wealthier Greeks of Constantinople, and also the peoples of the Balkan and Italian provinces strongly oppose iconoclasm. In recent decades in Greece, iconoclasm has become a favorite topic of progressive and Marxist historians and social scientists, who consider it a form of medieval class struggle and have drawn inspiration from it. Re-evaluation of the written and material evidence relating to the period of Byzantine iconoclasm by scholars including John Halden and Leslie Brubaker has challenged many of the basic assumptions and factual assertions of the traditional account. Background: Christian worship by the 6th century had developed a clear belief in the intercession of saints. This belief was also influenced by a concept of hierarchy of sanctity, with the Trinity at its pinnacle, followed by the Virgin Mary, referred to in Greek as the Theotokos or Metatheo, the saints, living holy men, women, and spiritual elders, followed by the rest of humanity. Thus, in order to obtain blessings or divine favor, early Christians would often pray or ask an intermediary, such as the saints or the Theotokos, or living fellow Christians believed to be holy, to intercede on their behalf with Christ. A strong sacramentality and belief in the importance of physical presence also joined the belief in intercession of saints with the use of relics and holy images in early Christian practices. Believers would, therefore, make pilgrimages to places sanctified by the physical presence of Christ or prominent saints and martyrs, such as the site of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Relics, or holy objects which were a part of the remains, or had come into contact with Christ, the Virgin or a saint, were also widely utilized in Christian practices at this time. Relics, a firmly embedded part of veneration by this period, provided physical presence of the divine but were not infinitely reproducible, and still usually required believers to undertake pilgrimage or have contact with somebody who had. The use and abuse of images had greatly increased during this period, and had generated a growing opposition among many in the Church. Although the progress and extent of these views is now unclear, images in the form of mosaics and paintings were widely used in churches, homes and other places such as over city gates, and had since the reign of Justinian I been increasingly taking on a spiritual significance of their own, and regarded at least in the popular mind as capable of possessing capacities in their own right, so that the image acts or behaves as the subject itself is expected to act or behave. It makes known its wishes. It enacts evangelical teachings. When attacked it bleeds. And, in some cases it defends itself against infidels with physical force. Key artifacts to blur this boundary emerged in c. 570 in the form of miraculously created acheiropoieta, or images not made by human hands. These sacred images were a form of contact relic, which additionally were taken to prove divine approval of the use of icons. The two most famous were the Mandalion of Edessa and the image of Camuliana from Cappadocia, by then in Constantinople. The latter was already regarded as a palladium that had won battles and saved Constantinople from the Persian Avar siege of 626. When the Patriarch paraded it around the walls of the city. Both were images of Christ, and at least in some versions of their stories supposedly made when Christ pressed a cloth to his face. In other versions of the Mandalion's story it joined a number of other images that were believed to have been painted from the life in the New Testament period by St. Luke or other human painters. Again demonstrating the support of Christ and the Virgin for icons, and the continuity of their use in Christianity since its start. The events of the 7th century, which was a period of major crisis for the Byzantine Empire, formed a catalyst for the expansion of the use of images of the holy and caused a dramatic shift in responses to them. Whether the acheiropoieta were a symptom or cause, the late 6th to 8th centuries witnessed the increasing thinning of the boundary between images not made by human hands, and images made by human hands. Images of Christ, the Theotokos and saints increasingly came to be regarded as relics. Contact relics and acheiropoieta already were, as points of access to the divine. By praying to an image of a holy figure, a believer's prayers were magnified by proximity to the holy. This change in practice seems to have been a major and organic development in Orthodox worship, which responded to the needs of believers to have access to divine support during the insecurities of the 7th century. It was not a change orchestrated or controlled by the Church. The events which have traditionally been labeled Byzantine Iconoclasm may be seen as the efforts of the organized Church and the imperial authorities to respond to these changes and to try to reassert some institutional control over popular practice. The rise of Islam in the 7th century had also caused some consideration of the use of holy images. Early Islamic beliefs stressed the impropriety of iconic representation. Earlier scholarship tried to link Byzantine iconoclasm directly to Islam by arguing that Byzantine emperors saw the success of the early caliphate, and decided that Byzantine use of images had angered God. This does not seem entirely plausible, however. The use of images had probably been increasing in the years leading up to the outbreak of iconoclasm. One notable change came in 695, when Justinian II put a full-faced image of Christ on the obverse of his gold coins. The effect on iconoclast opinion is unknown, but the change certainly caused Caliph Abd al-Malik to break permanently with his previous adoption of Byzantine coin types to start a purely Islamic coinage with lettering only. This appears more like two opposed camps asserting their positions than one empire seeking to imitate the other. More striking is the fact that Islamic iconoclasm rejected any depictions of living people or animals, not only religious images. By contrast, Byzantine iconomatry concerned itself only with the question of the holy presence of images. Thus, although the rise of Islam may have created an environment in which images were at the forefront of intellectual question and debate, Islamic iconoclasm does not seem to have had a direct causal role in the development of the Byzantine image debate. The goal of the iconoclasts was to restore the Church to the strict opposition to images in worship that they believed characterized at the least some parts of the early Church. Theologically, one aspect of the debate, as with most in Orthodox theology at the time, revolved around the two natures of Jesus. Iconoclasts believed that icons could not represent both the divine and the human natures of the Messiah at the same time, but separately, because an icon which depicted Jesus as purely physical would be Nestorianism, and one which showed him as both human and divine would not be able to do so without confusing the two natures into one mixed nature, which was monophysitism. All icons were thus heretical. Reference was also made to the prohibitions on the worship of graven images in the Mosaic Law, but the nature of biblical law in Christianity has always been in dispute. However, no detailed writings setting out iconoclast arguments have survived. We have only brief quotations and references in the writings of the iconodules.